This is the biography of Robert Frazier, who was known as Auburn's first mascot, but whose life story reveals he was so much more to the Auburn community. Robert Frazier was born on April 10, 1873, to a working family in Auburn, Alabama. His father, William Frazier, was a farmer, and his mother, Dorothy, was a maid. Robert was an athlete during his younger years, but couldn't go any further because there were no opportunities for African Americans to compete on a high school or college level due to radical inequalities in Auburn. He would go on to marry Dorothy Hall and had 10 children, which would become taxing on the family financially. He made sure that he owned his home and had a large house on Glen Avenue. Despite Auburn not having any formal African American high schools until 1928, his family was educated to some capacity, and they were all able to read and write. Robert worked many service jobs to afford his family's expenses, and all of his children worked as well. Having multiple jobs was common for African Americans because the job opportunities during this time didn't pay well. Each job generally paid $5 to $10 a week. Auburn University at the time was the biggest employer for African Americans, but they were limited to service jobs similar to the work of enslaved laborers. Robert would end up having multiple jobs, but his most consistent would be with Auburn University, where he would work in multiple aspects. Robert's various jobs outside of the university included butcher and farmer. He worked for Auburn's athletic department from 1892 until his sickness in 1921. In the athletic department, he was an athletic trainer for 30 years, an equipment handler, a scout, a sponsor for the athletic teams, and a mud boy. He was also used as a mascot in Auburn's first football game in 1892 against Georgia, and this game was also where the first term of War Eagle came from. Auburn students and working force referred to him and other African Americans working in the university in a condescending way. He wasn't respected because they only knew him by his many nicknames, like Bob, Sponsor, Preacher, and Dabble. They didn't get to know his real name. He was well liked in terms of amusement, or seen as a character of the college. At the end of Auburn's 1920 football season, Robert Frazier got very sick. He was taken care of with widely known doctors in Atlanta. Of course, the student body of Auburn didn't want their beloved sponsor to die, so they raised enough money to send him to Atlanta, Georgia, and then Mobile, Alabama. There, Dr. John O. Rush treated him and realized Robert was in critical condition. Robert died on June 19, 1921, and was buried in Baptist Hill Cemetery, Auburn's first separate black cemetery. The engravings on his headstone were provided by his membership in the Mosaic Templars of America, the large African American fraternity that provided death and burial insurance during the Jim Crow era. Robert was well known by athletic directors at Southern colleges, and most of the Auburn students, both white and black, for the last 30 years have called Robert Frazier their friends, not just as entertainment. However, he was also called many derogatory terms that have ties back to antebellum enslavement. Auburn most likely doesn't mention his history because it would imply Auburn was racist. His story and contribution to Auburn University was big, but unrecognized. He paved the way for people like James Owens, the first African football player, Henry Harris, the first African basketball player, and Thomas Gossam, the first African American athlete to graduate at Auburn University.